Someday you're never going to get to someday. None of us are. So someday is complete malarkey, as my grandmother used to say. But being able to realize that, well, let's just get started and see what happens.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm your host, Trisha Baxter. Joining me as co-host, Talar Herculean Corsi. Hey, Talar, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So let me just start by saying that this episode is kind of about our little baby, which is now your baby, which is a podcast, right? I've been podcasting for a year. You've joined me over the past 2 months. You're such a natural and you have a knack for it just because I think you're naturally curious about other people. So I think that talent translates into being a pretty decent, awesome podcast host and guest. So, but I really wanted to do an episode about podcasting. If you're listening to this, you probably are a little obsessed with podcasting. You probably have maybe 7 or 8 in your rotation. I know that I do. So I kind of wanted to lift the veil behind it. Whether you're just curious about the medium itself, or maybe you're thinking about getting into it yourself, we are going to talk about that today. Coming on the episode is Sebastian Rusk. I refer to him as the podcast king. He is the founder of Podcast Launch Lab, which is really, he takes somebody who's never podcasted before and he takes it all the way through 4 episodes and gets them, or maybe it was 6, I can't remember. He gets them uploaded and he does it all for you. He walks you through branding and logo. And he's been podcasting, I think, since 2008. So probably the longest podcaster that I've ever talked to. And he's so fun and interesting. So let's go ahead and bring him on. Welcome, Sebastian. How are you?
Patricia, what's happening? Thanks for having me on the show.
You're like my first guest that has like better sound than we do. Like you're set up. I love you right now.
Well, I am a podcaster.
I know.
And I do help people start a podcast. You got to play that part. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, sure, you know what you're talking about.
So, and that's why we have you on, is because you're the podcast king.
We just got done with a coaching session before we got started. That was amazing. Like an impromptu coaching session.
And ladies and gentlemen, he gives out free advice all the time. So make sure you hit him up, right?
You watch your mouth.
So the reason I wanted to have you come on, one, is because I think a lot of people find podcasting fabulous. You are the king of podcasting. You help people get started. I know we talked about you're rolling out a program to help existing podcasters maybe up their game, make it a little bit easier for them. And we'll talk about that. But let's get into your background. How did you become the podcast king?
Well, as soon as I got out of prison, I was like, I got to do something with my life because this is not going to work. I mean, my goodness. So, the story started about 10 years ago. I am a full-time single dad. Well, my daughter's in college now, so I don't know if I'm really full-time anymore, but I'm still parenting. But I started life a little young, didn't go to college, had a kid instead. I do not recommend that strategy, but it worked out for me. And a couple of years later, I became an entrepreneur. I lived in Southern California for about 10 years, and I had call centers where I would provide marketing and inbound services for realtors and mortgage brokers. Then 2008 rolled around. I had a lot of success with that, but not much character. And when 2008 rolled around, everything, the bottom fell out and the recession hit, and everyone kind of found themselves, especially in the real estate market, going, gee, what's next? So I was one of those individuals because I didn't plan for a rainy day. I was 25 years old. You can't tell me anything. I've got all the answers and all the money in the world. Just ask me. And in 2008, all of that went away. I found myself waking up in Newport Beach, and it's, $10,000 a month just to wake up and like live. That's not even having a lifestyle at all. And I came back for my best friend's wedding in March of 2008. And I woke up on the beach, not literally on the beach, but at a buddy's house. And I said, you know what? It's just time to come home. Like the bottom's falling out. There's no other choices. Let them take whatever they're going to take, and let's buy 2 one-way tickets and come back home. So I moved back to Miami in 2008 to 2010. I was a non-contributing member of society. I did absolutely nothing except feel sorry for myself. And one morning I woke up in 2010 and I had an awakening Tony Robbins moment. And I'm like, out of my way. I need to go see Tony Robbins in person and awaken the giant within. So I called a good friend of mine that was working with Tony at the time, lived in San Diego, and she filled me in on all the details. And she said, we'll see you in a couple months. I said, great. I hung up the phone. I'm like, how am I going to make that happen? It's in Long Beach, California. I got like $6 to my name. Well, she calls me back like 15 minutes later and she said, hey, I forgot to mention that my best friend, who's part of Tony's core team of 6, travels with him, lives on Miami Beach, and she's high energy and over the top, just like you. And it's definitely worth a cocktail. So I'm going to connect you two and definitely link up and see what you can do to help each other. I said, let's do it. So we connected that week. I sent her a video that I had shot on my laptop that was of poor quality and not really exciting at all. And I said, hey, I don't really know you. You're a perfect stranger. So I'm going to ask what your opinion is of this video. And she's like, oh my gosh, that was awesome. Your energy's great. You should totally start a YouTube channel. You'd have like 1 million followers. And I thought, great, what am I going to talk about? And she's like, dude, you're in the social media world. You have been since like the MySpace days. You should turn a business into that. And I thought, that's interesting. She said, there's a lot of buzz around social media. You start a TV show. And I go, yeah, what about Social Buzz TV? That's a cool name. So I sent those 3 words to a designer and they came back with what is still today the Social Buzz TV logo. So I now had a logo. Yay. I had no idea how I was going to make money, but I knew that I knew one thing. And that was a lot more than the average person did about social media. So I started evangelizing the fact that I had launched a brand called Social Buzz TV, and it's going to be the biggest and best company out there regarding social media. It's going to help people understand what social media is all about. It's going to educate them. We're going to do boot camps and networking events. And then eventually people would hire me to help them with their social media. I didn't know it was going to end up that way, but through networking events, and then I'd have people come back to the same venue and stick around for 3 hours for a boot camp. And I would teach them everything I know. And they would go, well, Sebastian, I've been to your networking event, or I've sponsored one of your events, or I met you at a networking event. And then I went to your boot camp, and my goodness, I need to do something with this social media stuff. Will you help me do it? So in 2011, a year later, after I launched the brand, I had monetized the company and opened the agency. So I was everything to everybody. Just ask me. I'll watch your freaking kids on the weekend as long as you're paying your invoice on a monthly basis. I was excited, and I didn't realize that, that's going to be very short-lived. People that pay the least are the biggest pain in the neck. That was the lesson that I learned there. And not everyone with a budget is your customer. Everyone willing to pay an invoice is not your ideal customer. I wrote a book in 2013 to tell that whole journey of going from rags to, I don't know if I'd call it riches, but going from the bottom of the mountain back to the top of it and building a brand from nothing. It's called Social Media Sucks if you don't know what you're doing. So I told that whole story in 2013. And what I had done simultaneously while building my brand was build my personal brand as an author, speaker, coach, and person of authority. So I was doing influencer marketing back in 2012 when no one even knew what an influencer was, but I was driving a Ford car for the weekend. I had a living room full of vitamin water. Perry Ellis sent me bow ties from their new collection. And I thought, well, I'm really onto something here. I'm a freaking walking billboard. But I still wasn't happy and satisfied with the world of social media because I found the speaking world extremely competitive. Because of that, I became an event MC for these conferences. Instead of trying to get booked to speak there when no one pays speakers and you had to get yourself there. I mean, they do, but it's very rare. I would be booked for the entire event because I was the guy that starts the show and ends the show. So I did a lot of free work until I could prove my worth. I did a lot of social media conferences. I met a lot of people that were influential in my life that said, hey, Sebastian, you're awesome. That was cool. And I'm like, can I get that on video real quick? So I put together a reel and I started to build my personal brand as an event MC in addition to being a social media guy. And then 2016 rolled around. I went to a personal development course, not Tony Robbins, a different one that forever altered my path and changed my life and the person that I was. I kept telling myself, I need to become the person that I need to be for the brand that I'm creating and wherever it is that I'm going. I must become the person, because I think there's some, I don't know, character flaws, maybe, but there's something there that's not lining up. And it was all rooted in myself. I found out that I hated myself. I didn't even love myself. I didn't know what self-love even was. And how could I be passionate about the work that I'm doing if I don't even love myself? So I went through that program. It took almost a year off while I did that unintentionally. And I got through that whole program. I met a girl on a dating app who introduced me to it. She broke up with me and I didn't make it. Her and I didn't make it, but I made it through the program. And in September of 2016, had another awakening moment 6 years later. And I was, after being in a funk and personal development and I don't even know what's going on, I said, that's it. We're getting back into the ring and we're going to get focused on doing something within the social space, but not specifically everything to everybody. I'm your social media guy. And I'd always had a podcast and I had a friend. So the day that I woke up and made a decision that I'm going to get my head back in the game, I came into this building on the 5th floor. There was a shared workspace where I could rent a desk for a couple $100. So I actually talked the people into giving me the desk for free. I'm like, I'll film my show here. I'll create content. I'll send people here. I'll do events here. I'm a good guy to have in the building. So they said, sure, no problem. We'll give it a shot. And I had a friend that was here recording their internet radio show in one of the offices. And I'm like, what are you doing in there? And she's like, I'm recording I have an internet radio show. I was like, what does that mean? And she goes, well, we have a show and it's on the internet and it gets distributed and replayed. And I said, great. How's it going? She goes, great. And I go, how do you know? She goes, I don't. And I said, you could be doing, and how much are you paying for that? She goes, $250 a week per episode. I said, interesting. $1,000 a month. You have no idea how well it's going. You should start a podcast. You can do that from your house and you can know who's tuning in and you can scale it, grow it. And most importantly, you can make up the rules. And she goes, well, how do you do that? So we're having this conversation as I walk her to her car and she looks at me and I'll never forget it. She goes, Sebastian, why don't you create a solution to help people like me start a podcast? And I go, ding, 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 ding. This is exactly what I was looking for. This was my awakening moment answer. So I went back upstairs. I took 3 sheets of paper out and I wrote on the top of the first sheet of paper, Podcast Launch Lab. This is going to be a 30-day turnkey, done for you, done with you podcast launch solution for marketers and entrepreneurs to go from idea to iTunes in 90 days or less. We're going to help them create a show name, a tagline. We're going to write an intro script, an outro script. We're going to pick background music, and we're going to plan out the first 7 episodes strategically, and then we're going to upload them into the podcast universe and help people go from, I have no idea what I need to do, but I do know that I need to start a podcast, to actually being able to do that. So fast forward 4 years later, I finally figured out who my ideal client was, which was a marketer and an entrepreneur. And I came back to this building at the end of last year. And I said, it's time to get uncomfortable, major part of personal development. And that's where the growth happens, I believe. And I rented an office suite that I then converted into the Podcast Launch Lab studio. Because I said, well, if we're going to take this thing to the next level, we're going to launch 100 shows in 2020, then we need to have a place that people can actually go to. This was pre-COVID. This was in January or December, rather, of last year. So I did just that. And I converted it into the vision that I had in my head, literally came to life down to the faux brick behind me. And that was in January of this year. And then COVID hit and everyone and their brother started launching a podcast. So my ability to grow this thing to where I wanted to happened. But the biggest takeaway that I had is that I'm doing work that matters, and I'm empowering people and I'm encouraging them and I'm giving them a platform to be able to tell their story, which I believe changes the world.
That's amazing. There's so much that I can relate to. One, I'm a big Tony Robbins fan, so I love that. I love that. And he is what started a lot of my journey on my own personal growth journey. So I love all of that. Let's go back to your podcast for a second, because you said I've always podcasted. When did you start podcasting?
So I started in 2011, right when I opened the agency, because there was a platform called Blog Talk Radio. In fact, I just wrote an entire chapter in my next book about the journey and how it all came about. Cause I always joke that my podcast hasn't broken any records. I don't have like some large giant show. I'm just a product of the product because I sell the product. So who am I to sell you a podcast service? And I don't even have a podcast, but it was a passion project. I had it on a platform called Blog Talk Radio. I had always wanted an internet radio show of some sort. I grew up in a radio station. My dad was a DJ for 29 years. So it was in my blood. I never set out to go, I'm going to go be a radio DJ. I didn't want to work for anybody because I'm a terrible employee, but I did want to be able to, exert my voice to be able to create content, and doing a podcast allowed me to do that. So I launched it initially with Blog Talk Radio. It was called Social Buzz On Air. Very comparable to Social Buzz TV. So I used the whole on-air thing from Ryan Seacrest, On Air with Ryan Seacrest. And I was doing a show every day, ridiculously aggressive, but their platform was garbage because every time I would get a good guest on, their platform would crap out or something would happen. So I said, okay, well, I'm done with Blog Talk Radio. And I stopped recording. Well, when you stop recording, sometimes that's exactly what happens. You don't continue to record. So a couple of years later, I decided that I was going to relaunch the show right around the time that I started the Podcast Launch Lab, and I renamed it the Seb Rusk Show, and on Social Buzz On Air. That was a mouthful. So I continued to record, and it was my ability to connect with people that were cooler than me, smarter than me, celebrities, etc., that I can't ordinarily get at, but being able to interview them because of their new book or something new that's going on in their life made a lot of sense to them. So I was able to do that and really bridge the gap of building that relationship through my podcast. And then it just became, I don't know. I went to a podcast conference and I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing with my show. Does anybody even know who Seb Rusk is? When they say, what's your show about? What's the show name? And I'd say the Seb Rusk Show. They kind of look at me with like I got 10 heads, and I'd kind of look at myself like I have 10 heads. So beginning of this year, I rebranded the show for the 3rd time. and I'm sticking with the name now. And it's called the Beyond the Story podcast. I am a digital storyteller, so I like to tell other people's story. I like to go a little bit beyond what their actual story is and extract some nuggets of wisdom out of that and really tell their story through the platform of what I'm doing. But yeah, it's called the Beyond the Story podcast, where we tell stories, and I like to interview people that are smarter than me, cooler than me, have done more than me, and get to learn from them. But it's really a gateway into building a relationship with them and selling them a podcast.
So you're going to have Talar and I on your podcast, since we're smarter than you, better than you, right? Like any day.
100%. 100. As soon as we get you guys signed up, we'll be in.
So like, that's fascinating, because like podcast seems to have taken off, and there's still a lot of room for it, a lot of room for growth, just from what I know.
Well, it started in 2008 when it started to take off. Podcasting started in 2003, and everyone's like, huh? And in 2008, it got real popular with the Serial podcast.
Yes.
They went through and started unpacking that entire case of the serial killer, or whatever it was called. I don't know the whole gist
Serial.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was called Serial. And then they get to the end of it and the case gets overturned because of the podcast. And I was like, whoa. And when that happened, I knew that this stuff is not going anywhere. Radio is dying a slow death, as is cable television, because streaming and everything else is taking over the television airwaves. But same thing's happening with audio. And we're in this audio era where we can say, hey, Alexa, order me new shampoo. I'm out. Okay, great. What else would you like for dinner? So it's interesting times that we're living in here. And audio is only going to continue to play into technology and AI, and making our lives less frictionless, which is what we all desire.
I cringed when you said her name out loud. We don't say her name in here. The girl whose name we don't say, because she can hear you, even though you're in my headphones. So don't say her name.
I don't
She'll
know.
start talking.
It's Alexa.
Oh, Alexa. Oh, yeah.
The girl.
I'm gonna order you some Pert Plus, and you didn't even know it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I had a really important question. So I lived in Newport Beach for a year, in Corona Del Mar.
I thought you looked familiar.
The Quiet Woman. Did you go to the Quiet Woman?
Yes, I did. Hold on a second. Where was that at?
On Corona Del Mar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Yeah. Oh, you would.
How long ago was that? I lived there 2001 to 2008.
I was there in 2008.
Hysterical.
I'm sure I saw you there.
I think I saw you at the beach. That was my favorite little beach.
Is that the beach that you woke up at?
That was so hold on.
That's what I wanted to know. So
hold on a second. I went to I went to the wedding, and then I came back. It was New Year's Day. I went to Corona Del Mar Beach. It was a gloomy, normal June gloom day type of day. And I was sitting there on June 1st with a list of goals and my Bible, because I'm a good Christian boy. Just ask me. And I said, I'll never forget this. The verse of the day that popped up on my Bible app that gives me like the Bible verse of the day was a verse that spoke of new beginnings. I'm creating something new. You wouldn't even believe it if I told you. And I'm like, okay, cool, coincidence, party of one, because I had looked up the verse in my Bible, and then I go, so if that's really true, show me. My hand to God, I look up in the water, and there's 6 dolphins in the shore break jumping around like it's SeaWorld. And I'm like, Roger that, we're going to Miami. So yeah, that's my story about Corona Del Mar Beach.
So let's go back to podcasting for a sec.
Okay.
So why do you think it is that it's taken off?
Because of it lessens the friction of consuming content. Friction meaning when you get in your car, turn your FM dial on, you've got some idiot talking over your favorite song, or another car ad that's irrelevant and you could care less about. And that's friction, in my opinion. It doesn't add to the listener's experience. Podcasting is really tailored towards what your interests are. You can pull up the podcast app just about anywhere now, type in a subject, and find content around that. And I think the ability of, if I send you a video, you feel obligated, your brain just automatically says, I have to watch this. Even though you don't, you can press play and listen to it. Usually a video is designed for some sort of visual aesthetic. Audio, if I send you a link to my podcast episode, you'll clean the house and hang out and make breakfast, or you're at work, at the office, at the gym, on a train, on a plane, whatever the case is, and you can start it and stop it and listen to it and re-listen to it again. And again, there's no friction there with that, because we got our headphones on and we're listening to music, or we're listening to a podcast. And I really just think that the ease of use and the ability to custom tailor it into what type of content you want to hear is the reason that it's becoming more and more popular. That and radio's dead as a doornail. I get a lot of pushback for that, but whatever.
I'm with you. I don't ever listen to radio.
Does that? Yeah.
So I just, I want to lodge a complaint right now.
Sure. Complaint department's closed today. Please call back tomorrow.
I work for a car dealership, as you can see on my shirt here, Vista Ford Lincoln in Woodland Hills and Oxnard. And I am offended that you don't listen or appreciate those advertisements that we have on the radio. And if there's a better place for them, please let us know.
On the internet. I bought my last car on Carvana on my phone, and I signed the paperwork in my living room. So I'm not really like a car dealership guy, but it is getting better. It is getting better. I did go assist my sister in buying a new car a couple months back, and we got to the dealership at 11, and we were out of there by 1 o'clock, which was a modern day miracle.
Well, but you know what? That's been one of the benefits. There've been so many silver, gold, and platinum linings to the pandemic. And I feel like your business is one example of it,
Sure.
you know, because
Right.
Trish and I have had an opportunity to talk to so many different people who are struggling right now,
Mhm.
where, their industry and profession is suffering, but it seems like this was literally a godsend for
Right.
somebody like you.
Right. 100%. I had a guy on my show a couple months back that works exclusively with dealerships and helps them grow exponentially. And he said that, because I was saying I bought my last car on Carvana. He's like, did you know you can buy any car from any dealership that way? But people
Yeah.
don't market it that way. They want people to come in here. So part of what I do to be able to help increase sales and volume on a dealership is saying, how do we leverage specific opportunities for people to lessen the barrier of entry of someone purchasing an automobile?
Well, we've definitely implemented that. I mean, we've been forced to with the different, orders and regulations. If we want to continue doing business, it has to be frictionless. So we had, a matter of weeks to be able to figure it all out and get it done. But you and I
Right.
definitely need to talk offline. Perhaps you can help me out with some other things.
Yes,
I did
absolutely.
have another vehicle related question. You did mention earlier that you had been driving a Ford. I'd like to know what kind of Ford it was.
I do not drive a Ford at all.
No, that you did back in the day. I took notes.
I did. Did I drive
You said
I do have
it.
a Ford F-150.
There you go.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was a brand deal though. They dropped off a new Escape at my house. We're like, can you drive this for a week and talk about it? I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't even have a car. Well, that was the idea, was that I approached Ford and said, hey, listen, why don't you drive? I've tried to have them give me a car. That's very difficult to do, but I did get them to give me one for a couple of weeks. I connected with the head of social for Ford, a guy by the name of Scott Monty at the time. And he was one of the most revolutionary guys within the auto space to be on the C-level and really introduce social and all their technology and everything they do as far as, getting their users involved with the creation of the apps that go into the whole, setup in the car there. So I was kind of, was a little more interested in Ford because of the technology on there, but I had Fords, I had the new Buick, and you name it. I drove it because, well, otherwise I'd take the bus, but they didn't know that.
Okay, so I moved to strike everything after I drove a Ford Escape. That's all I really wanted. All the rest of that, doesn't really.
All right. Let's go back to podcasting.
Sorry.
Everything leads back to podcasting. I'm a Chevy guy for the record now.
No, you
absolutely.
did not. I'm out of here.
I drive a canary yellow Camaro, and it is the love of my life. Just ask her.
Oh my gosh. Men
Let's
in
go back.
cars.
Let's go back to podcasting then.
I love that. In our next segment, back to podcasting.
So I have to just I fell in love with podcasting a couple years ago, and it was like, once I discovered it, I didn't know where I was. I must have been my under a rock or something, because if it's been around since 2008 and I only discovered it, I think
it's been around since 2003.
All right. So yeah, I clearly had my head up my ass or something. I only discovered in 2016, I think around there. And I started out with Serial, and then I led to some other ones. And then I began to purposely look for the content that I wanted to find. I was big into real estate investing. I didn't know anything. So I started just listening to every real estate podcast I could get a hold of, and I learned so much. So fast forward to last summer, 2019, August 2019, we were kind of trying to start thinking outside the box from a legal profession as lawyers. What could we do that's different on the marketing front? I was like, I don't want to do the same old boring crap that we've been doing for so long. And I was like, let's try a podcast. And I started out with the goal of marketing, just for marketing, to get in front of new clients, to be seen as a thought leader. And I found that I loved it. Like, and we've taken it way beyond that to some of these episodes I know won't ever lead me to work, but I just love doing them and they're so much fun. But but and I see, and through that, so I've been doing this for about a year now, and I have a lot of people that ask me how to do it, that they're thinking about doing. So many people have said, I think about doing it in the legal world. My question to you is, there an industry that you think doesn't work with podcasting, or is it just completely wide open to anything?
Wide open.
Wide open.
Wide open.
What about in the legal world? Because I know there are a lot of legal podcasts out there. I listened to some really great ones, and I've listened to some not very great ones. What would be your advice to lawyers looking to start podcasts?
Talk about stuff that doesn't have to do with the law. Practicing law is some boring stuff.
I think my clients would agree with you.
It really, really is. I like to say I was mentored and taught by a guy by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk. I met Gary about 12 years ago in Philly. No, I didn't meet him in Philly. That was the second time I met. I had seen him, was in Philly. He wrote his first book was called Crush It. And that forever altered the path that I was on as far as where we're going with this whole it's a content game, and there's someone out there that wants to consume your content. The content needs to be informative, entertaining, and there has to be some sort of reason that people want to tune into it. Now, I guess the number one example that comes to my mind when I think content and attorneys is Legal Eagle on YouTube.
Oh, he's amazing.
Gosh, he's great. But he's not doing anything specific. He's just creating content and topics that are relevant, and he's talking about them. And it pertains to the law. And it makes sense when he actually explains it and gives his point of view on here. To me, that's fun content. He's still talking about the law, but he's entertaining, and it's in a format of that appeals to people. Now, it's a YouTube channel, so it's visual, but I think a lot of the content that he shares could be audio too. He could very well have a podcast too. I'm not sure, but I think being able to create content that complements your brand in addition to content that pertains to your brand is very, very important when creating a podcast. I don't think it always has to be about what you do. Just like you said, I don't know if this episode is going, or I don't know if some of the episodes I've produced are going to lead to business. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're not a psychic. I mean, maybe you are, but I doubt it. And you probably don't have a crystal ball, as I don't either. So you just don't know. If I sat here and made a list of all of the opportunities that were created out of my podcast that turned into business, we'd be here for a while. It doesn't always happen, but it's not always one thing leads to another. It's a series of things like, hey, you found me because of Shay Rowbottom, because you're in her mastermind, and you know that I launched her podcast and that she talks about me, and that's just the way we ended up connecting on here. So, and again, we don't know where that's going to go, or what's going to happen from there, or what your business is going to. So you just never really know. And I think that if you keep that mentality of you just never really know what's going to happen and stay open to any possibilities, I think that's when it starts to jive a little bit for you, versus getting in your way of saying, well, if I talk about that, is it really going to lead to business? I mean, you just don't know. You know what is going to lead to business? You being committed and consistent to creating content, growing your community, engaging with that community, and continuing to up your game every single time as much as you possibly can.
You know, Trish and I share the same life coach, and her name is Olivia Vizacero. She is an amazing woman. And one of the recent lessons I learned from her, are similar to what you were just talking about, is, instead of confining yourself, be curious. Be curious and open to the potential possibilities. When I was back in private practice, I would meet clients in the most unlikely ways. On an airplane after I was drooling on myself, falling asleep, somebody's looking at an employee handbook, and I'm like, hey, I could help you with that. And So that's really interesting that you say that.
That she spills her martini on it. Yeah.
No, it wasn't martini. It was wine. It was wine.
Fair enough.
But yeah, you know,
Right out of the bottle.
in the line at the grocery store, in the restroom, like you never know who you're going pee next to. It could be your next client.
It's true. This is true.
Yeah.
That's why I wear these shirts everywhere. Not only is it the name of the next book, Podcasts Suck if you don't have one, but it starts conversations with people. Podcasts suck.
Well,
Podcasts.
let me get.
Oh, if you don't have one, hey, I've been thinking about starting a podcast.
Well, let me get some free advice from you. I want to throw out my thinking, and I want you to tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Okay.
I tend to pick podcast topics just by either what people routinely ask me questions about, or just what I would find interesting, or really just interesting people that are entertaining and fun, and like that we can. That's how Talar became like my co-host, is because I had her as a podcast guest, and she's just hysterical. And I'm like, you need to just come on and host with me. And she's doing this for free. Like it's crazy.
I'm not. What do you mean? I'm not getting paid?
No,
Seb,
you're not getting paid.
Seb, aren't I supposed to get paid for this? You're the expert.
We broke this news live on the podcast. Look at that.
Oh my goodness, that's horrible.
You
Sorry,
never really
Talar.
know. You never really know what opportunities are going to come about and how it goes. It doesn't matter how you start. What's that quote? Start with what you have, where you're at, with whatever that quote is. And it's true. You're never going to get to someday. None of us are. So someday is complete malarkey, as my grandmother used to say. But being able to realize that, well, let's just get started and see what happens.
And let go of the perfection, right? You have to let go of the perfection.
Done is better than perfect. I had a student call me yesterday and go, I've got 4 episodes that I'm ready to send over to you to be edited, but I haven't reviewed them yet. And I said, I'm sorry. Come again. So wait. Let me better understand here. So you record the podcast episode and then you go back and listen to it and critique yourself and expect yourself to not have any feedback or critique. And that's called in the personal development world. The training teaches us that that's what's called a racket in our mind. It is a story that we make up that isn't even true. And we run that circle. And then the worst part, it goes a little bit further. We start to enroll people in that racket. Hey, so I recorded 4 podcast episodes. Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, but I haven't listened to them yet. And I like to go through them and make sure that they're absolutely perfect before I get them over to my podcast editor, because I understand. Yeah, I like things being perfect too before I go get them. And the next thing you know, you start enrolling people into your BS story that isn't even true. So I forgot what the question was, but that was the answer.
That's a great answer.
That was
I think it took me a year to start a podcast, not the technical infrastructure part, the mindset part. It was a year for me to get over myself, to be like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I can figure it out. But all those thoughts crept in my head for that year. What would I say? How would I do it? Would people want to listen? Like all that stuff crept in, and I don't even know if people want to listen, but I'm here. I'm showing up consistently. Right. I want to have real, informal, fun, entertaining conversations, because I don't think people want to get on and be all serious all the time. Like there's a time to give information, and there's time just to let loose and have fun. And
sure.
I think the beauty is when you can do both at the same time. You can educate and entertain. What is it? Edutainment or whatever that word is now.
Right. Educate, motivate, and differentiate, as they would say in B&I.
So let's I know anybody who's listening and wants to start a podcast, obviously they're going to reach out to you and get your services, right? So that's a given. Right. For those people that are maybe 2 steps behind, what do you think is a couple of pieces of advice that you can give them on how they can start their first podcast?
I can represent myself in court, but I'm not going to do it. Why? Because I can call you to handle it and the judge won't get pissed at me. Okay. I can also change the oil in my car, but I don't like to get dirty. So I'll bring it to Jiffy Lube for $25. Well, mine's a Camaro. It costs $50, but still, I'm not bragging. It's a sports car. Anyway, I could do a lot of things on my own, but I choose not to do them. The Podcast Launch Lab exists. I'm in business and I've been very successful with it for the reason that people understand the value of hiring an expert. Not saying that I'm an expert, because I don't think podcasting's been along and relevant and around long enough for there to actually be experts, but I know more than most do. Enough for people to say, hey, listen, if I pay you, can you teach me what I don't know that I don't know? And the answer to that is absolutely, it's yes. So there's 2 options. There's 2 types of people that I've realized when it comes to starting a podcast. We've got the do-it-yourselfers. I know how to do it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to watch videos. I'm going to buy equipment. I'm going to do it because I can do it. And we got those I can doers and do it yourselfers. And those people typically get to the finish line and realize there's a couple things that they don't know and they still need me. And I still work with those individuals too, they just got to dot a couple I's and cross a couple T's and they're off to the races. Then we have the average person that doesn't know anything about podcasting, but they know they want to start a podcast. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about that. Kind of like Shay. Shay's a great example of that. Sebastian, I want to tell the story of my childhood. It was a jacked up childhood, but I want to tell it in the form of a podcast. How do I do that? Well, actually, you're going to teach me how to do that. You don't need to tell me how to actually do that. You can just, I'm going to hire you and you're going to walk me through the process of being able to start a podcast. So there's two people, do-it-yourselfers and the people that call me and say, Sebastian, you're the obvious choice for helping me get to the finish line on starting a podcast.
So what do you prefer, Sebastian, Seb, Mr. Wonderful?
Call me whatever you want. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Okay. So Seb, what have you ever gotten in this situation where somebody comes to you for services and they're like, this is what I want to do. I want to talk about cows and all the different colors that cows come in. And you look at them and say, what?
That's a really stupid idea. I think you can do better.
So you do provide that kind of feedback.
Listen, I can tell you the truth or I can tell you what you want to hear, but I cannot do both.
Okay. Now this is the other very important question I have.
What if you got somebody with like a voice like this? Would you work with somebody who sounds like this, or would you discourage them from doing podcasts?
Oh my God.
No shame whatsoever.
So we all have gifts. You know, my sister can sing. I cannot. Okay. She can also play the piano. I know a couple chords. Okay. So we all have our gifts on here. Most people with different voice varieties, I think would be the most politically correct way to put that, recognize that they sound different, high pitched or whatever it may be. You know what? Do it anyway. It's you. You're not going to be able to change it unless you're going to be able to change your tonality with somehow, some way. But yeah, there are some people that like, listen, the content's great, but I just can't take his or her voice. And that's some for guys. That's some for females. I don't know. I haven't been up against that yet to go, Sebastian, do you think my voice sucks and I'm not going to be able to do a podcast? I haven't come up against that yet. We do work on tonality and delivery and being able to communicate that way. So if you do have a high pitched voice, there may be a way to alter that without sounding altered, maybe by slowing down your talk or what have you. But I don't know that I would tell anybody based on the way that you sound. I don't know that podcasting is for you because I don't want them to go jump off a roof, you know?
Yeah, that would suck. Oh my gosh. I mean, it's
all your fault too.
You'd get to make it on the news, but that's not good publicity.
Right.
I had something really, really important to ask you. I've really enjoyed getting free advice from you, both on air, off air. I mean, you get what you pay for, right? And
That's
you
right.
have been giving us free advice. So I'm just kidding about that part. I mean, you are very valuable. You're invaluable. I'm sure your mother tells you the same thing.
Yeah, I was about to say my mom tells me that every day. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe it. It is true. So I wanted to find out, in the spirit of giving and free advice, how are Trish and I doing? Do you have any constructive criticism?
No, but I did figure out a few ways for you guys to hire me based on what you told me with what you're doing on the show. So that's a positive. We'll go over that later, though.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
We don't want to share that. We don't want to give all of your traits.
You guys, well, there's just a couple things that I think could be improved upon and could be better. The fact that you guys are consistent, that you record together, you got the co-host thing going on, which is great. Because in the event you didn't have a guest, you guys could pick a topic and rock and roll with that. And you're consistent with it and you're concerned about the ongoing growth. That's how we initially connected. Patricia, you reached out to me and you're like, listen, I've had a show for a year and it's not growing the way that I thought it was going to grow. And my first question was, how did you think it was going to grow? And we talked about that and we flushed it out and we traded some ideas and we said, let's keep the conversation going. And then it turned into me becoming a guest on your show and us chatting a little bit more about podcasting, to really starting to unlock my mind a little bit about, whoa, there's an area that we can definitely look a little closer at. And what about if they did this? And what about if we did this? And what about if this was an idea? So it's just kind of cool how this stuff, case in point on what podcasting does, when you have the opportunity to sit down with someone, it creates opportunities all the way around for both parties to win.
And I will say, I wish I had discovered you a year ago because I was very much the DIY person. And I spun my wheels. I spent money on equipment that did not work out. Like, there was a lot of hiccups, a lot of growing pains that I probably could have saved by hiring somebody. Like, I discovered Shay last November. I hired a LinkedIn coach and she blew me away. She took my social media presence to a whole new level that I started out very much on a DIY social media campaign, but discovering her, I got to a whole new level. Right. She like opened my eyes to coaching. And then I hired a life coach. I hired a sales coach. Like, I wish I had a podcast coach.
You're about to hire a podcast coach. I mean, look at that.
I'm addicted to coaching because I'm like, you have knowledge that I don't have. I could try to learn it, or I could just steal it from you. Right. So I wish I had discovered you back then, because I went through like 3 different kinds of cameras. I went through different lighting. I went through different mics. Like, it was not pretty, but what was I going with that? So if let's just say you want to give some free advice to people that do want to try the DIY. Why can't I get that term right? DIY.
Why can't I spell coincidence right?
What would you say as far as equipment? What should they start? Should they care about video? Should they care about sound? Or does none of that matter? None
of that matters. Make sure you're in a quiet place with decent lighting, maybe in front of a window. Make sure you're sitting in front of the window. Get your iPhone headphones that come with every iPhone on the planet. If you're an Android user, I don't know, Beats makes one with a mic. Get some sort of contraption that'll plug into your phone that has headphones and a mic already on it. So you can record on an iPhone or on a smartphone. There doesn't have to be any fancy equipment. There doesn't have to, let me get everything lined up and have it all perfect. It doesn't. You've got to have a message and you've got to have content about what you want to talk about around that message. And you need to, as my friend Brian Fanzo would say, press the damn button. The button is the record button, without overanalyzing and scrutinizing yourself to a degree of like, what in the world did I just record? And I don't know if it's good enough. And just focus on creating content and being consistent with it. Now, if you're just getting started and you're a do-it-yourselfer, I would say start with the Anchor platform, anchor.fm. It's free, which is a great price. You can create a podcast. You can record a podcast, edit a podcast, create an intro, an outro, transitions. You can post it, produce it, market it, monetize it, all within the Anchor platform for free. Anchor was picked up by Spotify for some ungodly amount of money about 1.5 years ago, and for good reason, because the platform is outstanding. Now, some seasoned podcasters would say, well, stay away from Anchor, but I haven't. They own all your content. I'm like, you're just getting started. Do you really care who owns your content? You're just getting started. And guess what? You can leave anytime you want. So I always like to say, if you're just getting started, start with Anchor. If you're like, well, I've heard about Libsyn and Buzzsprout. What about that? Well, then that requires that you record your podcast. You can do that via Zoom. Make sure you're actually recording it, because then Zoom will give the archived audio and video. And then you can take that archived audio, have an audio editor, put an intro and an outro on it, and you can upload it to your podcast host of choice. That's going to run you between $10 and $25 a month, depending on who you decide to use. But you do need to create an intro for the show. That's and an outro. Those are your bookends that go on each and every episode. The intro obviously introduces the show and gets people excited and fired up. And then the outro thanks them for tuning in and has some sort of call to action. So those two will go on the beginning and end of each episode, and then you're just uploading it. And then from there, you need to figure out a way to be able to create content to be able to market the podcast. So creating things like audiograms and marketing flyers. You can create these things in Canva. There's great audiogram software out there like Headliner.app, about $12 a month, but it actually has some auto creator too. You can put the link to your podcast episode and it'll automatically generate audiograms and send them to you every day, every week, whatever you choose to do. And talk about the show in between each episode that you're recording. Make sure that you are talking about it and creating content above and beyond the the podcast episodes. So can you do it yourself? Sure. There's a lot of work involved. So you need some sort of streamlined game plan in order to make sure that you don't get frazzled and overwhelmed, because I know one thing, and I know it for sure, and that is a confused mind will always say no. And when it becomes too challenging and there's too many logistics and I thought it was going to be like this and it's not, well, screw it, I'll get back to it. Next thing you know, 12 months later, no podcast, all of your competition starting a podcast. You're just the shoulda, woulda, coulda guy or girl. And so just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be that difficult, and you can put all the work in. But here's the deal. I have a lot of people that put in the work. I got the podcast host. I got the name. I got the intro, the outro, the podcast art. I got my first 4 episodes already in the bag, already recorded. I'm here. But how do I get it in iTunes? And what is that little picture thingy with sounds, got little squiggly lines? And how do I create a flyer for each episode? And can you run ads on this stuff? How do you get people to listen to your podcast? How do you get them to download episodes? So these are all additional things that need to be done, even if you are a do-it-yourselfer. And that's typically when someone will hire me. And that's where my coaching really comes in. My coaching comes into play with the students that sign up for my program and my ongoing alumni students, where we continue to produce their show, like Shay. But my coaching, the one-off coaching clients usually come from the people that are at the finish line, not quite across the finish line yet, or they've already got a show and the show just isn't up to snuff on where they think it should be, or they've asked my professional opinion on how the show can be improved. And of course that turns into me spending usually about 30 days with them to flush out all of those logistics and details that they need to know, that they didn't know that they needed to know, to improve the overall process. And then that usually converts into an ongoing student where we produce our show ongoing and help them with stuff. And then I have a monthly mastermind too, that everybody gets together and all the podcasters get to meet other podcasters. And then I do live trainings on a monthly basis. We do it 1 day a month for 90 minutes. I tackle topics that I don't teach within coaching and within my actual launch program on here. Things like how to market your podcast, how to find podcast guests on LinkedIn, how to create an audiogram, all that fun stuff.
Is part of the element of your coaching, do you have to do with the mindset too? Do you get people that come to you who want to start one but have fear that's stopping them? And maybe it's not the logistics or the infrastructure, but it's the mental side of putting yourself out there in front of a mic so people can hear you.
Right. So you can sit there and you can be scared of yourself, and you can be, self-conscious and shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I really don't know what I'm going to sound like, and people are going to say, and I'm going to be judged, and I'm going to be this, that, and the other. Or you can just say, I simply don't give 3 rips what people say, because I have a message to tell and I'm going to tell it. You're either, there's 2 options. Ready? You're going to like me or you're not. That's it. And guess what? Either way, it's totally cool. Totally cool. Yeah.
I think, because you've done the work, right? You've done the mindset work to get there. A lot of people haven't. So, to get over that hump.
It's funny that you say that. It's funny that you say that, because I find a lot of the work that's come through the training that I've done through just life has a lot to do with all that. And I just had that same conversation about the stories that we make up in our head, or interpretation. I just had this with a student yesterday about wanting to review all of the episodes before she actually sends them to me. I'm like, are you crazy? Wait, don't answer that. And she's like, well, I mean, why do you ask that? I go, because there's no reason why, because done is better than perfect. Unless you legitimately screwed up, said something wrong, mangled the name, the dog barked in the back of the what's called, there's not, which you can just tell me where those timestamps are at and I'll have an editor cut those out. But there doesn't have to be you going, because she's like, I have to allocate a half hour to record and then another half hour to review my recording and then go upload everything and send it to you and your team. And I'm like, that's just bananas. So that's when I went into the talk, like, do you know how our brain works? And she goes, well, kind of. And I go, yeah, we all kind of know, but there is a way that there is a couple things that are for sure's. Okay. One for sure is we are interpretation machines. You know what that means? That means we make shit up all the time, constantly. And the scariest part, it's on autopilot. What? So we've got to control what stories are actually being created in our head. And usually those stories are of self-worth, of mindset, of belief, of believing in yourself, believing in what you're doing, and the content that you're actually creating on here. So yes, a lot of personal development of becoming who you need to be as a human being has a lot to play into the ventures that you take on in business, and and how you show up in business, because who you are in here is who you are out there, and vice versa.
As it should be, right? Like when you first started telling your story, it struck me when you were like, I was trying to fit myself into what I thought my personal brand should be, when it's the opposite that works. It's you create your personal brand from who you are.
Right.
You show up as a podcast host or a guest based on who you are,
Sure.
not who you think you should be. People smell that from a mile away. So
Really do.
I love that. So I know I need to wrap this up. A couple things. What are your favorite podcasts? What do you listen to?
I listen to Rogan.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Are you a
wanna
podcast
be
junkie? Like, do you listen to a ton of them?
I don't really a lot. I probably should. I get that question a lot. What's your favorite podcast? I'm like, Beyond the Story. Have you heard it? But Rogan, How I Built This is good. A lot of NPR podcasts are great. There's another one about the fall of WeWork called We Fall, I think. And it talked about the whole crumbling of the WeWork empire, which was pretty cool. And well, just because the CEO is just a lunatic. So they kind of broke that all down and how they really arrived at where they were at. But yeah, How I Built This with what's his name? Guy Raz. I think his name is. He's a great podcast host, and they really talk about stories of how things were created. I remember hearing the Five Guys story. The Five Guys are actually the dad and the four sons. So that's a fun fact.
I love that story.
Five Guys, the WeWork original story of how it was built was there, which was very, very interesting on how the WeWork concept came to life. And just really understanding how these brands became the mega brands that they were, where they originally started from. So I enjoy hearing other people's story. Rogan has such a diverse guest list on his show. Sometimes it's people you haven't even heard of. Sometimes it's people that you want to hear. And one of my favorites lately is the one that he did last year. He just re-released it again when he joined Spotify, and that was the Mike Tyson interview. So he sat down for like 2.5 hours with Mike Tyson talking about how Mike bought some tigers while he was still in prison for the backyard, and just all kinds of crazy stories. And so yeah, I enjoy the stories. And the cool part about Rogan is that there's no scripted format. It's just a 2.5 hour conversation. And he's very, very intuitive on being able to ask questions, get feedback, chime in on what people are already talking about. And I just think he's an all around, great podcast host.
That's awesome. Well, Talar, any last words? You want to tell us what your favorite podcast is besides ours, of course?
My favorite one, and I didn't get into it till maybe 2 or 3 years ago, is Oprah's Soul Sundays. That's how I was introduced to Eckhart Tolle.
Oprah, though, I mean, come on.
Yeah, but Eckhart Tolle, he's excellent. But what I wanted to ask Seb, and I know we're short on time, so you're only allowed like 2 items per. This is like the fast and furious questioning. Ready, set, go. Favorite music?
Country.
Oh, really? Okay. Hobbies?
Drinking beer, playing golf, and watching sports.
Favorite book?
The Bible.
Favorite person?
My mom.
Oh,
that's
favorite
so sweet.
Favorite child?
I've got one that I know of, and that'd be Kayla.
Well, then she's your favorite and your least favorite, as my son would say. Yeah. Okay, I'm pretty much done. Thank you very much for
That's it for rapid
humoring
fire.
me. That's it. Yeah. I went easy on you. You seemed scared.
I am. I'm scared. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sebastian, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I think people find podcasting so fascinating. And if you haven't, I know so many of my friends listen to them religiously. Like they have 7 or 8 on their constant round. And it's just an interesting medium that I'm still learning even a year into it. So
It's a
thank
free
you.
mentoring session, just like reading a book, a free mentoring session.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Make sure you give us that like, that subscribe, that rating, what channel you're listening to. We really super appreciate it.
And one more
Sure
thing, if you do want, I'll talk to anybody for 15 minutes about their podcast idea. It's not always a fit. I say no more times than I say none, because, or yes, rather, because of the fact that you've got to be a fit for the community. There's a specific breed of entrepreneur and marketer that fits within the culture here. And you've also have to have a strong why. That's like the number one thing, a strong why of starting a podcast. And if you can sell me on that, then I go over what the details are of our program and see if you're going to be a fit for that. So I'd be happy to chat with anybody that's listening or watching this interview on here. You can get to my calendar by going to podcastlaunchlabnow.com. And then if you just want to check us out, it's podcastlaunchlab.com. You can watch videos and equipment and testimonials and my YouTube channel and all that fun stuff.
Love it. So make sure you guys hit up and connect with Sebastian.
All of these links are going to be in the show notes, right, ladies?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Right. As soon as you help me do them, right? As soon as I hire you and you help me do them.
Back to that, Mac.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode of The Defense Never Rests. We will see you then.